I'm sharing this because of its strangeness and because I'm looking for an explanation. This happened in early July while I was visiting my two friends, Jake and Ryan, at their house in South Michigan. It's a rural area with their house set back in the woods off a quiet road. The surrounding area is mostly farmland, with neighboring houses several hundred feet apart. A path branches off the main road, looping around a large grove of trees, connecting to their driveway as well as the other neighbors' driveways, before merging back with the main road. We often walk this road at night, without flashlights, as the dense tree cover blocks all natural light from reaching the ground. Just before 11 p.m. on my second to last night there, after sitting around a bonfire in the backyard, we decided to take that very walk. Earlier, Jake and I had decided to try and scare Ryan. So as we were walking off their property, Jake and I quietly picked up a few things to throw into the darkness to startle him. Jake grabbed a large branch and I got a pine cone and a smaller branch. Then we set out. Along the walk, Jake threw his large branch, then I threw my pine cone. Then there was a third sound that wasn't from either of us before I threw my branch. Jake and I pretended to be scared of the noises, but none of our attempts seemed to affect Ryan. We made it around the bend of the road and were approaching the area where the trees clear and the moonlight illuminates the ground. Though we were still in pitch darkness, we could see the light ahead. Jake suddenly stopped in his tracks and said, "Wait, I hear dragging." I assumed he was joking, so I played along, but then I heard it too. About 30 to 50 feet in front of us, there was a loud dragging sound against the asphalt. Whatever it was sounded very heavy. I felt my entire body run cold. The sound stopped, and we all stood still to listen. Then it started up again about 15 seconds later, before quickly stopping. I tried to use my phone's flashlight to light up the road, but even at its most powerful setting, it only reached about 10 feet in front of us. Ryan quietly said to us, "Ready, guys?" Then dramatically breathed in and let out one of the most deafening yells I've ever heard in my life. Why this was his first instinct, I don't know, but he later said it was a survival mechanism. We stayed still, then the dragging started again, almost sounding closer than before. Not wanting to let it get any closer, the three of us took off running back the way we came. We reached the bend off the road again and slowed down, assuming whatever it was didn't follow us. Then we heard a branch snap in the woods to our right and ran all the way back to their house. They told their parents what happened and that the yelling wasn't anything to worry about, but they didn't think much of it. About 20 minutes later, we all decided to head inside. Their dad stayed outside to put the fire out, then came in and said to us, "There's either an owl outside or something imitating an owl," which may be one of the most frightening sentences anyone's ever said to me. We went to the screen door to listen, and there was a clear patterned owl sound very far away. There was also another, louder, closer, and less patterned sound that could be an owl but also could be something else. The sound stopped, and within the hour, we were asleep. The next morning, we took the long way driving off their property, along the same path we had walked the previous night. There was nothing to be seen in the area where we heard the sound. No branches or logs on the road. No evidence of any dead animals. At the closest neighbor's house, which is a few hundred feet from where we heard the sound, we saw the local feral cat sitting on their driveway, so we got out to say hi. The neighbor, likely in his 40s, was in his garage. He saw us and came out to talk. Ryan asked him if by any chance he had been doing any work outside around 11 p.m. the previous night. He said he wasn't. He and his wife were asleep upstairs by that time. We've thought about the incident a lot and can't think of a logical explanation for what was causing the sound. And even though we don't have an explanation, the three of us agree on the following statements. 1. There was absolutely no wind. The woods were completely silent, except for the dragging sound. 2. There were no lights, footsteps, or talking, and you would expect a person to react to an ear-splitting yell that close to them. 3. The three largest wild animals here are foxes, coyotes, and deer, and I would assume any of those would run from a yell like that. 4. Whatever was being dragged sounded very heavy, not hollow or organic. It sounded plastic-like a full city trash bin with no wheels. And finally, the sound was definitely coming from the road, not the woods or above us. This happened about 5 years ago, back when I was going through hard times and was homeless. I used to live in Denver, Colorado, which is where this took place. There are several cemeteries in the Denver area, but there's one in particular on the outskirts of Denver that's very large and very old. I think it may be the oldest one that's still being actively used. Before I became homeless, I didn't know much about this area. I had always gotten a creepy feeling, but didn't know why until I was on the streets. After that, I heard from many different people that the cemetery had lots of underground tunnels, and some homeless people live in these tunnels. But in the deeper ones, there is some cult activity. These tunnels have secret entrances all over the area, and the homeless that live around this area avoid some of these so-called spider holes, because people have been known to disappear near them, with most of those people being women. This area has a river going through it alongside the graveyard. One side of the river has a darker feel than the other, making it feel eerie. Anyways, one time I was wandering the area with a few other acquaintances, safety in numbers and all that. We had nowhere to go and decided to hang out in the abandoned part of the graveyard, the older side. It had just gotten dark and it was windy. It was also during the fall, so it was cold. We were huddled up against gravestones to block the wind. One of the people I was with knew the area better than me, and he had warned me to be very vigilant. I figured this was so we wouldn't attract the attention of security, police, or fellow homeless people. But I later found out why he was so anxious. It was probably around 10 p.m. We had sort of all just been sitting in silence, trying to stay warm, hoping the night passed quickly, when I heard my acquaintance, let's call him Jay, whisper, "Hey, heads up, keep quiet." I had already been quiet, but I immediately tensed up, assuming he spotted security or something. But as I looked around, I saw in the distance some small flickering lights appearing here and there all around the cemetery. It's like people had scattered all around the large graveyard, and they were all holding lighters that they flicked on. After my eyes adjusted a bit, I recognized they seemed to be holding candles. I looked harder and could sort of see the outlines of people holding those candles. Jay whispered, "We gotta go." We clumsily started grabbing the few items we had around us. Jay came right up next to me and said, "Follow me and don't look at him." I was thinking, what? Me and our other friend quickly started following Jay, moving at a quick walk straight to the break in the fence where we had come in. I was stupid enough to look behind me and saw the lights or figures continuing to appear all around us, and they were walking to the middle of the graveyard to stand in a circle. I passed by a few of them and saw out of the corner of my eye they were wearing black cloaks. I could feel the menacing presence in the stares, like they were daring me to look at them. But I had an overwhelming feeling that if we left them alone, they would leave us alone. One thing that haunted me afterwards was the way they seemed to move towards the middle. They moved quickly and smoothly, like they were gliding. I know that's a stereotype, but they just seemed to morph out of the darkness. My instincts were on high alert. I knew whoever they were pure evil. We got the hell out of there, and once we got to the fence, we full-on sprinted for a few blocks. Jay didn't explain much. He just said to avoid those people, and don't look them in the eye, or they could have power over you. I definitely got that feeling from the encounter. I asked why they weren't scared of cops or security, and Jay said they got away with stuff because the authorities didn't want to look into it at the risk of being targeted. I don't know how true this is, but I do know what I saw and how I felt. In the summer of 2022, I was desperate and frustrated. I had quit my job a few months prior in the pursuit of my own startup, and my business wasn't exactly thriving. After 6 years of IVF treatment, my wife had blessed me with a daughter early that year. And while I was elated to be a father, the stress of being a dad, the financial pressures from the clinic, and the weight of being the sole provider for my family had taken a significant toll in the recent months. As summer approached, I decided I needed a weekend away to clear my head and get back into the grind. I chose to take a 2-night trip, just me and our dogs, to a lake off an old logging road about 3 hours from home. It was one of my favorite spots, and I knew the woods there quite well. I packed my things, leashed the dogs, 2 blue heelers, and set out early one Tuesday morning. When I got to the trailhead, the parking lot was empty. It was the middle of the week, and I was stoked to be alone. There was a single deer path up a canyon about 5 miles to get to the lake, and neither myself nor the dogs met anyone else on the trail the entire way up the mountain. I got to the lake around midday, spent the afternoon fishing and collecting wood and water for the coming night. The lake was pristine and quiet, not a soul in sight. I was truly alone, aside from the dogs. I found a flat spot on the east side of the lake where the vegetation cleared and I could set up a tent. So I made a small camp about 30 yards from the trail. I would have preferred to go further up the mountain, but it was still early in the season, and when I got to my campsite, the rest of the trail was too snow-packed to continue any further. As it was, I had to navigate over several hard-packed embankments before I got to a suitable area. The icy slush was difficult to navigate, even for the dogs, and when we had finally crushed our way over and through a few hundred yards, I made the decision we would be going no further. I set up my tent, hung my pack on a limb, and took my fishing pole back the direction I had come. I spent the evening catching and cooking fish at the edge of the spillway, and as the sun began to set, the dogs and I made our way back to the tent. Slipping over wet stumps and clumsily pushing through the snow, I stumbled into camp exhausted and ready for a fire. As I approached the site, though, I realized some things were out of place. My pack, which had been hanging on a limb, was sitting neatly on the other side of the clearing about 20 feet from where I had left it. Sitting on top of it was a large eagle feather. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The dogs began a low growl, but as they circled the site, there was no one there. As I approached my tent, a stick had been used to carve an inscription in the dirt outside the entrance. It was 2 U's, one upside down connected to the other by a thin line, and then further connected by another line to a larger U shape. This is a photo I took of the carving. I would describe it as a Native American petroglyph in the shape of a bird or an eagle. Uniform, symmetrical, and above all things, fresh. Someone had been here. Someone neither I nor 2 very distrusting dogs had seen, heard, or smelled. Someone who had left no footprints through the snow or mud. Someone who had not passed us on the trail, or whose car had been parked at the trailhead. My stomach dropped. I felt a presence was watching me, but I couldn't tell from where. I quickly built a huge campfire, and with dread, watched as the last of the sunlight sank beyond the ridge. That night was a fever dream. Pulling the dogs into the tent with me, I clung to my knife and flashlight, praying that whatever was watching me would leave. But it didn't. Throughout the night, I was periodically awakened to a variety of sounds, yells, shrieks, and the snapping of branches. The dogs would sit up, growl, and bark until I would open the screen of the tent and shine my light into the forest. At one point, I had just drifted off to sleep when the dog's slow growl woke me up. Thinking I might have to drop on whatever this was, I slowly unzipped the tent and leaned out with my flashlight. Taking a breath, I clicked it on. Standing just 3 feet from me was a doe and her calf. I scanned across her, and an entire herd of them was in the sight. As my dogs lost it, the deer spooked and sprinted back into the forest. A crushing and trampling noise could be heard as several dozen deer evacuated the area. As it faded, I heard laughter. The deep laughter of a man turned to crying as it escalated. It then turned to sobbing, and then to deep growling. Much more boisterous than anything my dogs could make, or even a bear. I held the dogs tightly. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night, and as soon as the sun peeked into the valley, I packed my things and left. I have never been so terrified in my life. It's been 2 years and I can't make sense of it. I need answers.